It took nearly 5 years, but Biden's inner circle is now coming clean, or cleaner at least, about the mental decline we've been talking about for nearly 5 years. Better late than never, or too little too late. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. The show starts now.
Everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Oh, a stumble down memory lane. Yeah, remember when they told us that was all cheap fake, deep fake, and that behind closed doors, Biden was a mental Olympian? Well, I hate to break it to you, they lied. No duh. But now those perhaps closest to him are selling him down the river. Suddenly they have a crisis of conscience to come clean, and boy, are they singing like canaries. Several Biden tell-alls are set to roll out in the coming months, and they all have a unifying theme. Joe was not fit to run an HOA meeting, let alone run the free world. But they let him, or someone else, do it anyway. Some of the anecdotes from these books are not necessarily shocking to those of us with eyes and ears, but boy, are they disturbing. According to his aides, they had to use fluorescent tape, neon breadcrumbs, if you will, to guide Joe's movements, not just on stages, but in private homes of friends and donors. One of those books, Fight Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House by NBC News' Jonathan Allen and The Hill's Amy Parnas, suggests Kamala aides were concerned Joe might die in office, and her communications director drew up a death pool roster of federal judges who could swear in Harris as president if Biden kicked the bucket. Another story suggests his senior advisor, Ron Klain, was concerned Joe thought he was president of NATO, not the United States. Joe didn't know he was president, and that's probably because he really wasn't, really just in name only. Who was running our country? I think we'd all like to know. And look, I already know this is coming. The left will say we shouldn't be focusing on Biden or focusing on the past, and we should instead be talking about the tariffs and the stock market. Okay, fair. But here's my point. The folks who are insisting President Trump is unfit for the job or doesn't know what he's doing are the same folks who told us Joe was a mental Olympian. Sorry, you don't have credibility here. I'm sticking with President Trump. Joining me now for this Liberal Tuesday from the other side of the divide is For You podcast host, Cameron Kasky. All right, Cameron, I'm happy to have you. Thank you for joining the conversation. I want to just start off. We have a lot to discuss, but let's start off with the first thing first. These books coming out about Joe Biden, right? I understand the left is like, hey, we don't want to talk about that. That's the past. Move on. But the books are coming out. So I'm wondering what your initial reaction is to some of these tell-alls and the disturbing details we're getting.
Well, I think it's about more than just the past. It's about the future, because is this going to be a party where we keep on enabling things like Biden's cognitive decline? You know, I was one of the first people in my kind of liberal influencer circles to be saying, hey, this is not somebody who would be hired to manage a small ice cream shop, much less president of the United States. And there were so many people in his inner circle, in the media, who were sort of just making these excuses. And you have to say, Biden was probably being effectively convinced that he was all right, because all these people in his circles were telling him, no, Joe, you're going to be fine, because there's this sort of cult, and this happens with Trump too, and it's been happening with Trump since 2016. There's this cult of personality that forms around these political figures where the people around them want the career opportunities and the, praise that come from you telling this politician what they want to hear. So folks were telling Joe, no, you're so sharp. And they were saying to their friends, no, he's so sharp behind the scenes. But it just became this kind of feedback loop where everybody was reinforcing this completely nonsense narrative. And now it's like, okay, Democratic Party, are we going to continue letting, Ivy League consultants convince us that the politicians we're putting forward are better than they are?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100% on that. And the people that are now coming forward and talking about this, I mean, I honestly think they've lost all their credibility. I don't know how we can trust them after that. But I would also include, Vice President Kamala Harris in that. Do you think there's any way that she didn't notice the steep decline of Joe Biden? And if she did notice it and she didn't say anything, do you think that's disqualifying for her future?
I think the interesting thing with Harris's position was when she was running for office, she sort of had to simultaneously say, the past 4 years have been great, and we're going to give you a sequel to the past 4 years that have been great. So vote for 4 more great years. But she also was well aware that they were not 4 great years. They were 4 years that were certainly better than they could have been. And there were some great things that happened. The economy was in, I think, better shape than a lot of people characterize it as having been in. But it was sort of this trying to have your cake and eat it too situation. And I don't blame Harris for how she went about it because I don't know how I would have gone about it. She can't throw Joe under the bus and be like, oh, this administration where I was just the vice president, was really bad and I'm going to be different. But she also had to convince everybody, hey, you're not happy with how this has gone. Don't worry. We're going to do something else this time. But it was great.
But what about the decline? The record aside, Kamala had to have seen it. We kept hearing that they were so close. They ate lunch together on a weekly basis. She had to have seen that Joe was slipping and failing and flailing cognitively, not just his policies that somebody else, I believe, was making. But do you think that maybe she, for the good of the country as the vice president, should have stepped up and said, hey, this guy's not doing well. We got to do something here?
Yeah, that's another one of those situations where I say, I don't know how I would have gone about that because if Harris had gone out and publicly backstabbed the president who had chosen her as VP, I don't think that would have been particularly well received by anybody across any aisle. But also, unfortunately, you're not going to catch me making excuses for a single person enabling Biden because unlike a lot of people in our party, although more and more are coming out, now that they have books that they want to sell, I think that the Biden cover up was everybody's fault. And, I was out there saying, because I was so disgusted by what Trump was saying in his campaign, I was out there saying, like, look, I'm going to vote for Biden. But I wasn't acting like it was this party I was throwing. I was almost in a very embarrassed way saying, like, yeah, I'm going to vote for Joe. That goes to show where we're at right now. So I think that the biggest problem was less the people who were saying, this is why we have to vote for Biden right now. And it was more the people who were acting like, oh, no. He's razor sharp. Trust us. He can't really deliver 3 sentences without tripping over his words. But behind the scenes, he's actually great. Those are the people who really upset me. And those types of consultants who allow these things to happen, we need to root them out of the party. The Democratic Party is not going to be able to gain a victory in any upcoming elections if the people who were enabling the Biden dementia complex are still around.
Well, I agree with you on that. Let's talk about the state of the Democrat Party now. And, feel free to chime in on the state of the conservative movement. I expect that. I welcome the conversation. But while we're talking about the Democrat Party, I think that it's pretty obvious from the approval ratings that the party doesn't really have a clear leader right now, doesn't really have a clear message right now, other than everything Donald Trump does is bad. Now, it's okay to say that. It's okay to disagree with the president and the party in power. But correct me if I'm wrong, I have yet to see the Democrat Party or the Democrat left advance anything other than they just don't like Trump. And maybe you've seen some policy positions, but I haven't seen any clear agenda from the Democrats. And I think that the party is still in trouble and still needs a reckoning. Do you see it differently?
I mean, it's tough because I think a lot of members of the party are asking right now, okay, if we spend the next 4 years playing nice with the Trump administration, are we going to be able to find any common ground with them where we can do the types of things that benefit everybody and the types of things that normally are unburdened by party lines? But the administration is saying, no, actually, we're good. We don't need the Democrats to be behind much of what we do at all, so we're not going to bother. One thing I referenced, I did a press conference with Chuck Schumer maybe a couple days after the inauguration, maybe 4 days, where we were talking about the bipartisan school safety board. It was a school safety board that was made in response to violence at schools, very often shootings, also other things, that was made of people from both parties, was enthusiastically supported by people from both parties because it wasn't making it about the guns or the Second Amendment. It was about providing resources to schools to root out certain issues that lead to the types of violence that people disagree on how we're going to handle. So the Bipartisan School Safety Board, they weren't talking about guns, which I obviously, began my adult life talking about. They were saying, what sort of mental health programs can we offer young people? And, a lot of people on the right, when one of these school shootings happens, they say, this is a mental health issue, not a gun issue. It's like, okay, well, it is also a mental health issue. It is an issue we need to tackle with the resources we provide students who are struggling. So the school safety board, they were working with law enforcement to make sure law enforcement was able to respond the best way possible and communicate with the school as efficiently as they could. They were talking about mental health things. It was something that Democrats and Republicans were both supporting pretty much across the board. And there were no politics involved with this meeting. They were saying, how can we make schools safer in ways that we can all agree upon? And then Trump goes in and says, all right, that's done. We're done with that. So the Democratic Party is tripping over itself right now saying, okay, well, if we're a little sweet with Trump, maybe we can get him to cool down a little bit. And other people in the party are saying, no, the only thing we could do at this point is fight and look at the policies we have that are popular and push those types of things. Okay. And I don't have an answer because the party doesn't seem to be aligned. One thing I will point out is you were saying that the Democratic Party was just acting like Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad. One thing that went pretty viral in the party that was interesting to me was the Democrats Twitter page put out a video of some congressman that I hear is a nice guy. I don't remember his name, but there was a video of some congressman being like, okay, here's why the tariffs could actually be good for you. And everyone in the party was slamming him for it. Everyone was like, this is not the type of energy we need right now. I was too bored 10 seconds into the video to watch it, so I don't know if he made a cogent argument. But I guess the Democrats are trying to make some things look slightly better than they are. But it's the messaging is our shoelaces are tied across the board.
Yeah. So when we're talking about the Democrat Party advancing alternatives, I just haven't seen those alternatives. I know that they don't like Doge and they don't want Doge cuts. I know that they don't like President Trump deporting the criminal aliens to El Salvador. I know they don't like that. I know that they don't like keeping men out of women's sports. I know that they don't necessarily believe in parental rights when the transing of kids is happening in certain states. Happening in Colorado right now. There's a bill on the table that would effectively, take away that right from parents and treat them as if, they were abusers if they didn't affirm a child's gender identity. So that's what I've heard from Democrats is we don't like this, we don't like this, we don't like this, we don't like this. Hands off protests, carrying around Donald Trump blow up dolls. I've seen a lot of that. I've seen a lot of Elon's a fascist, Trump is a fascist. I haven't seen a lot of, but we would like to do this. And I know that they're against a lot of the things, but I haven't seen, and I'm wondering if you've seen, outside of, anecdotal small things like you mentioned, a safety board, anything large. Like we want to do this in terms of immigration. We want to do this in terms of government waste, fraud, and abuse. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it was sort of one of the things I said in response to the Harris campaign. And when everybody was trying to figure out why the loss was so bad, I said, okay, we're saying we're not going back without providing very clear an answer as to where we're going in the first place. And that was something that really frustrated me because I think the party was trying to position itself as simultaneously progressive and, this forward-thinking organization, but also say, and we're moderate and we're going to get the Liz Cheney Republicans to vote for us. And I always say the Liz Cheney Republicans are the Democratic Party's imaginary friend, because if there's somebody who's going to vote for Donald Trump, capitulating to the right a certain amount and remaining a Democrat, you're not going to get people who would vote for Donald Trump to vote for you. So I thought that was really annoying. On the other stuff, the interesting thing about immigration and deportation was that the Democratic Party and Republican Party, in terms of policy leading up to the election, were fairly aligned. It was really messaging where they felt so different. The Democrats weren't going up and rambling about how they're eating the cats and they're eating the dogs, but Kamala and Joe and the Senate, in terms of the Democratic Party, we're all pushing pretty aggressively on immigration. I think the difference right now is when the Democrats are saying we have a crisis at the border, we need to do something about this. And you saw so many deportations under Obama and Biden. You saw very many. It just becomes a messaging thing. But it's like now they're not just deporting illegal immigrants anymore. They are getting rid of due process. They are deporting like random people from Maryland. They're
Wait. I
deporting
have
people.
to stop you there. I have to stop you there. I appreciate your perspective, but they are not deporting random people from Maryland.
Oh
They are
yeah, the
not.
Chief Justice. Yeah.
No, they're not deporting random people. The gentleman that you're talking about that's being coined as this Maryland father has already been, first of all, illegal alien, already been deemed by not only the police department, but a judge that he is gang affiliated. So the whole thing about he was deported with the administrative error, it had to do with the flight he was on. And I did a deep dive into this with a gang attorney. It didn't have anything to do with, oh, he shouldn't have been deported. It was the administrative error of the flight and the seat and the manifest. That's what it was about. So to say that the Trump administration is just swooping up, people off the street for no apparent reason and send them to El Salvador, that's just simply not what's happening. So I
Well,
have to push
they have
back
owned
there.
up to certain like miscalculations. And also I have a hard time understanding what is and is not gang affiliated because they've come out and been like, "Ooh, we saw this tattoo, so they were gang affiliated." I think that was about the barber that they threw out, but at the end of the day, gang affiliated or not, there's due process. You put these people in front of courts and you give them
But these people have been in front of courts. And in the case of the Maryland father, he's already been in front of a court. He's been here since 2011. He was supposed to be out of here already. He is ripe for deportation. The whole issue with him was an administrative error of which flight, what time. That was the whole thing with him. And the Supreme Court has now ruled President Trump does have the authority. And we're talking about due process. Illegal aliens don't get the same due process that you and I get. No, we're not going to swoop people up and just say, you're going to El Salvador. But the due process is a little different. And if the police department says you're gang affiliated and an immigration judge says you're gang affiliated and also you're an illegal alien and you broke the law to get into this country, I'm sorry, I'm not sure it's even the best messaging for the Democrat left to take that you want those people to stay here on our dime in our communities. I mean, I think that's a hard sell. And I think that you mentioned the messaging on that, I think that's really hard for most Americans to chew on.
I don't really know what the right's messaging is other than we're just going to get rid of the people and anyone who we say is gang affiliated is gang affiliated. But I think it speaks to just a larger situation with the legal system right now, where we're seeing how weak the legal system in this country is. Because it turns out, when we have a president who's going after these law firms, when we have judges who are getting, when we're spending millions and millions of dollars against these quote unquote activist judges, how much can our legal system do to protect just human rights in general when it's something that can kind of be bought, paid for, and, kind of MAGA bullied out of efficacy. So that's of concern to me. I mean, you see like MAGA's even turning on Amy Coney Barrett, who is an extremely conservative judge, handpicked by Donald Trump. They're going after a judge that was picked by George Bush. And it's like these people are very conservative. They voted against Roe. They are conservative across the board. And when they don't vote the way these people want them to, suddenly they're a traitor to this country. And I'm like, oh my God.
I don't say that. I mean, listen, I'm personally, I've never been a fan of Amy Coney Barrett. I just haven't. I've never really liked her. But her decision is her decision. I respect the Supreme Court and I respect the decision that was ultimately made in favor of the Trump administration. So I don't put myself in that bucket. I've criticized MAGA. I've criticized President Trump when I felt it was necessary on many occasions, and I've been ripped up and down for it, by the way. So I'm not existing in that world. And I do believe in the co-equal branches of government. I do, however, look at activist judges, and I will call them activist judges, because when you have a judge that's sitting in D.C. that's making sweeping orders that hand ties the president of the United States from deportations and handling matters of national security, I think that's going too far. And I think there's been a lot of discussion. And you know what? It happened, and Democrats didn't like it when judges hamstrung the Biden administration over things like student loans. So I think it goes both ways there. But I don't think that one judge sitting in one district should be able to make sweeping orders that impact the chief executive of this country and his ability to carry out his tasks. I think it should be limited to the jurisdiction that you're in and the parties that are in front of you. It's kind of wild that somebody that could be, in one jurisdiction could say, I'm making a rule for the entire country and hamstringing the president. That's where my issue is. But I do want to move on. Oh, go ahead. I want to give you the last word on this, but I have so much to go over, so I do want to move on after that.
Got it. Totally. Just real quick. Yeah, it just brings to mind sort of what are our lines of defenses in terms of checks and balances? Because yes, we have this bicameral legislature, but you see, Republicans who are popular in their home states are voting very often not in line with the policies that they run on and not in line with the values that they use to build their public presence. They're just voting alongside Trump because the second you stand against his specific agenda in the Republican Party, you're kind of toast. So I don't mind an activist judge if they are going to stand up to administration that normally doesn't have to face accountability at all. I saw that you were talking about the group chat and you said they effed up, they need to admit it and move on. And I'm like, when is there going to be some sort of accountability? Like, getting MSNBC to report on something is not accountability. Like punishing people for doing the wrong thing is accountability. So when judges and courts get in the way of the administration's agenda, I say, okay, at least somebody's doing it.
Yeah, I think, well, the Supreme Court already made that decision. So I do defer to the Supreme Court. Sometimes they make decisions I don't like. Sometimes they make decisions that I do like. And they're the final word, and that's just how it goes on this. I do want to get to some other things, though, in terms of the Democrat Party and the messaging. Do you think that Jasmine Crockett is the best messenger for the Democrat left right now?
I'll do you one better. I rarely see Jasmine Crockett's messaging because I spend too much time posting on social media. I try not to read social media. I do think there was a very large overreaction to the type of stuff she was saying. And that's sort of something when you're representing the Democratic Party that is always going to happen is if you say inflammatory things that people in the Republican Party very often get inflammatory themselves and talk about how, the Democrats are, communists who are coming after your rights and they're going to kill your babies and stuff like that. You can say inflammatory stuff like that. I don't even remember what Crockett said that initially got everybody so upset.
To be fair, she said a lot of things. I could play you a reel. We don't even have enough time. I'm going to play a recent one, and you tell me if you think this is beyond the pale here.
So I had to go around the country and educate people about what immigrants do for this country or the fact that we are a country of immigrants.
Right.
The fact is, ain't none of y'all trying to go and farm right now. Okay, so I'm lying. Raise your hands. You're not. We done picking cotton. We are. You can't pay us enough to find a plantation.
I know that's right.
I want your reaction to that.
Yeah, I don't know how quick I'm going to be to tell a Black person how to talk about slavery related stuff. I will say in terms of the farms and everything, I do think that is effective messaging in one way or another on immigration in the sense that it points out how much American businesses rely on immigrant labor. And the more you're chipping away at this workforce, the more businesses like that are going to suffer.
But I want to ask you a question there, because what she said, I'm going to summarize it, and you tell me if I'm doing it incorrectly. This is what I heard. I heard Jasmine Crockett say, we need illegal immigrants to pick cotton and pick our crops because we don't want to do it anymore. We're not slaves anymore. We want the illegal aliens to do it. That's what I heard. And I can't imagine how demeaning that must be if you are in fact an illegal alien picking crops or doing farm work, which is noble work. To have her say, like, you guys are going to do it for less and we're going to illegally import labor because we don't want to do it. I'm not so sure that that's the message that the Democrats want to push on immigration, but maybe I'm mischaracterizing it.
No, there's sort of a snake eating its own tail there where it's like, we do have to point out the fact that immigrant labor is so deeply tied to how a lot of businesses that exist in America and create wealth in America are reliant on immigrant workers. But also it's like we want to advocate for things like unions and things like workers being protected from exploitation by the people who are getting their labor. So it's you're right to say it's sort of a have your cake and eat it too situation where we want to point out the fact that immigrant workers are so valuable to this country, but we also want to be a party that can tell workers across the board that we are going to support you. We are going to have your back. And the cynical answer is sort of, I think your messaging on it should depend on where you're running and who you're talking to. I don't think immigrant laborers are going to have their feelings hurt by watching CNBC and seeing Jasmine Crockett go off, or I don't think immigrant laborers who might feel disrespected by that messaging are scrolling Twitter and watching the, Midas Touch people retweeting that. I don't think that's the case.
She said it, though. It's not as if we just found it. I mean, she keeps saying these things, calling the governor of Texas Hot Wheels because he's wheelchair bound. I mean, listen, there are just some things that you just don't say. And if you do say them because you think you're being funny, you got to go back and you got to say, I thought I was being funny and it was completely inappropriate and I apologize. I've done that.
Kind of Trump's MO. Like Trump's MO was the fact that he was able to build popularity by being the guy who was willing to say the offensive stuff like that.
And y'all hate him for it. And you know what? Donald Trump does pick, he does pick on people. There's no doubt about that. But Jasmine Crockett calling the governor of Texas Hot Wheels because he's in a wheelchair. I get we can do the whataboutisms. Trump said this, Trump said that. But I'm saying this person appears to be who's being elevated in the Democrat Party. She's on the liberal networks on a weekly, if not nightly basis. Her messaging, and she wants it to be, is paramount. She is being prioritized. So I'm asking if you think that that's the best messenger. But I do want to move on to some other things in the Democrat Party, and I want you to tell me if you think this is the right move strategically. You're a young person in the Democrat Party. You're critical of your own party, and I want to hear from you. Do you think that this continuous fight to keep trans women, biological men in women's sports is a smart move strategically for your party?
I think it's just one of those situations where we're getting out messaged. I mean, the types of people who stand up for trans people who are one of the most bullied and discriminated against groups of people in this country, a minority where you can't stress enough minority. It is such a small group of people who take up so much time in the news, who so many, specifically conservatives and certain liberals, spend so much time talking about. It's whatever less than 1%, I mean, significantly less than 1% of people anywhere ever. And the Democratic Party has two options. We can either say, we're not going to leave you guys behind and we are going to support you because your rights are human rights. Or we can say, no, we're going to throw you under the bus to win the Liz Cheney Republicans who, like I said, are made up and imaginary.
I don't think it's just Liz Cheney Republicans. I mean, this is at least a 70-30 issue. So it's not
we're
just
getting
Republicans.
we're getting out message.
You're getting out message
at the end of the
because
day.
It's ridiculous. You understand how ridiculous it is to say that you mentioned it's a small minority. The tyranny of the minority to go in and compete against women and entire teams of girls and young girls and collegiate athletes and say, we're going to win your championships. We're going to win. And I mean, the list just keeps going on and on and on. We're going to take this away from you and you just have to deal with it because we say we're women and get over it. I mean, that's essentially the message to young girls and young women.
How many trans women were in the NCAA final last night?
It doesn't matter how many. What I'm telling you.
But you just said win your championships. Like UConn won the championship. Do they have trans women on the team?
You know what? In a couple of years, they might. So that's the thing, is that your party is not saying, hey, there's a couple of these cases, they're outliers. Your party is actively encouraging more people to be trans. And you're actively encouraging people that are trans women to do whatever they want to do. So this is not something that's going away anytime soon. But when you see the list, how is it that you can look at these young girls that are competing, that are losing their opportunities, their scholarships, that are actually getting physically hurt? How can you look at these girls and be like, get over it because there's not that many of you? Just a few of you are going to have to die at the altar of trans.
I would say two things. I would say, first of all, I think the reason the Democrats are getting out messaged, you could say it's because it's ridiculous. I think it's because what happened when we started taking steps towards social progression is the thing that led to people talking about woke is the fact that the hoity-toity fancy corporate world started to adopt it. And therefore, this kind of woke speak took over what is otherwise just a matter of basic progressive values. And therefore, there's just certain steps we took in certain directions where people didn't see it as authentic anymore because it's the same stuff that you're seeing in like billion-dollar company memos. So the way people talk about trans issues, in my opinion, is so often so performative. Many of the Democrats I know who are talking about trans issues like don't know a trans person, and they're talking about how, we need to fight, and stuff like that. And I agree, but there's this big disconnect between the trans community. And I don't think the Democratic Party is necessarily trying to convince more people to be trans. I think they're trying to convince more trans people to comfortably be themselves for the sake of their mental health. But to what I was saying, I think that we're getting out message because we're not saying the obvious, which is this doesn't really affect almost anybody's lives. While people's college funds and 401ks are disappearing, like a trans person swimming, that's an issue that the Republican Party has been able to milk so effectively. But the people who talk about trans issues the most are often the people who know the fewest trans people. And I want you to be able to respond to that. But one more thing I'll say is like, I personally have a hard time thinking about like the whole girls sports argument when it comes to trans women, because I'm not trying to like pull some sort of cheap victim card here. That's not my side of the Democratic Party. That's not my bag, so to speak. But I'm from a high school where 17 people got murdered by a 19-year-old who had dozens and dozens of reports to the FBI about his behavior, and who the police had been notified was a danger, and who the school system had been notified was a danger. He legally bought an AR-15 at the age of 19 years old and came into my high school and shot 17 people. So when people are talking about this terrible thing that's going on in schools, I'm like, hey, I got one even worse for you.
Right. And I don't want to take away from what you went through. We had a trans person murder young kids here in Nashville. So, I can't understand your unique perspective on it, given your connection to it. But I can tell you that obviously it's important to talk about school safety. We had a trans murder young kids here in Nashville. But I don't think.
And then you get someone like the Bipartisan School Safety Board, and it's like, oh, we did away with that.
Well, I'd have to look at your bipartisan school safety board in order to actively give you my response to if I think that it's worthwhile or not. I'm sure that it is.
Well, I'll tell you this. It's not my board, because the Democratic Party would never let me near anything they do. Like, yeah, I got invited to a press conference by Schumer to talk about that board, but generally speaking, the Democratic establishment is not going to be making room for anybody who has anything to say about things like, I don't know, a president deteriorating in front of everybody. Okay, so I appreciate you saying it's my board. I wish it was my board because it's a great board, but they ain't letting anywhere near anything like that.
Question for you. Well, why do they let Harry Sisson next to anything?
I have been asking that question since long before anybody else was asking that question. But, there's just a certain type of influencer who it's like, if you can find a young person who is acting like an older candidate is good for young people, it's like, okay, well, let's come let this young person. It's like when the Trump campaign was able to find people from different minority communities who they didn't necessarily think would show up for Trump as much as they ended up showing up. And they would, platform that person, because if you can find, when Trump pointed at that guy and said, that's my African American, if you can find someone who represents a group of people who you don't think you're able to reach and get them to show up in front of a camera smiling and say, hey, this is actually good for people like me, I think you're going to want to do that.
Well, do you think that it worked in the case of Harry? Do you think that felt genuine and authentic to Gen Zers?
To tell you the truth, and this is something that I don't say on the show I do for the Bulwark because I need to maintain a certain image there, but just candidly for your audience, I'm going to get real. I claim to understand Gen Z a lot, but every day I sort of switch, sometimes at a moment's notice, between thinking I understand Gen Z better than anybody else and thinking, what even are these people? Because the truth is, I take no pleasure in admitting this. I'm just trying to be real. Not only did I think Harris was going to win, I thought Gen Z was going to overwhelmingly show up for Harris, including Gen Z white men who so overwhelmingly showed up for Trump. So I've since been able to meditate on that and explore that. And that's something I'd love to discuss if we get the time. But in general, I was walking into election day so hot-headed, I might as well have been wearing sunglasses, like Gen Z young white men are going to show up. We're going to show everybody that we care about the types of things that I care about. And then it didn't work. So look, if Harry's messaging is working,
Well,
that's great because
clearly it didn't. I think he's kind of been dropped for some scandals. But I don't have a ton of time left, but I do want to try to unpack what you just said there just a little bit because I think your perspective is really interesting. Yeah, all those influencers out there, like they lied to you. Like Joe lost, Kamala lost. They're the same person. You know, they wouldn't change anything. So Harry went from Joe and then he jumped on Kamala, and it was all just a losing gamble. But why do you think that white men, particularly young white men, didn't show out for Harris now that you've had some time to reflect?
I think that the right was able to successfully convince young white men that steps forward that we're taking for women and minorities are at our expense. And I think that young white men have felt very left out of the Democratic Party's narrative. And the Democratic Party is so afraid of looking racist or misogynist or anything of the sort that there was no effort put in to reaching young white men and saying, here's why things like this are going to work for you. So young white men right now are looking at the economy and they're seeing that, I think JP Morgan is predicting that we're going to recession. I think many reputable individuals are predicting that, except for, I guess, Fox News, where you go to their website and you go to their show. I think they removed the stock market ticker.
Oh, no, I watched all morning. They had it on there. We had a very long conversation.
But the day after the tariffs kicked in, didn't they take the ticker off the day after the tariffs kicked in?
I don't believe so. I watch Fox News pretty religiously, given I'm an employee, and I've heard a lot of discussion about the stock market and having various individuals on as well that disagree with Trump on the tariffs, including Elon Musk, who y'all hate, but now he's saying he doesn't like the tariffs. So now I'm wondering, like, are we done keying Teslas, or what do you think? Do you think that there's going to be some love for Elon again since he's criticizing tariffs?
Yeah, his brother Kimball, or some ridiculous name like that, tweeted something really negative about the tariffs. And he ran that by Elon, because not only are they brothers, Kimball is also, or again, however you pronounce that, I couldn't begin to tell you, he is also a board member of Tesla. So if he's tweeting something like that from the board of Tesla, Elon saw it and he okayed it. And I think people in the Democratic Party have been waiting for the kind of diva Real Housewives fallout between Elon and Trump that everybody can expect, because Trump famously has besties and then they stop being besties. And it's all fun and games when you're Elon Musk dismantling the regulatory systems that prevent you from making as much money as you want and, giving government contracts to yourself and cutting them for everybody else. But suddenly, once Tesla gets affected, this Trump guy who
Tesla has been getting affected because of his work at Doge. So I don't know if you can fully say that, but I do want to ask you, are you then impressed then that because, the left has been saying that President Trump listens to Elon and that Elon is the real president, but President Trump is not backing off the tariffs, even though Elon hates the tariffs. So do you think that shows that President Trump is in fact in charge of his own policy making and that Elon doesn't actually in fact have that much power over him?
I'll do you one better. I kind of never thought Elon was really the puppeteer. I saw Elon going in and dismantling government jobs, regulatory systems, things like that. Getting a lot of people who voted for Trump fired who didn't know that they were voting for losing their job. But I've always said it's been Peter Thiel. It's been Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel he installed his vice president, J.D. Vance, and he's the one calling the shots here, because the billionaire elites that Trump originally was able to cultivate such energy standing up against, they are the ones who benefit from an economic crash. Because while the average American and the average, person who participates in our economy loses buying and saving power, the billionaires are able to seize more power over us than they ever have before. So what people were saying about Elon, look, I don't like Elon. I think Elon should quit everything he's doing, stop doing ketamine, and spend some time with his children, if they'll even see him. But I think all eyes should be on Peter Thiel. I think all eyes should be on Peter Thiel, who is this century's Roy Cohn. And to know what that means is to probably understand that's not a very good thing, although Jeremy Strong might play him in a turn that deserved an Oscar.
I will say two things on that, and then I'm going to let you go just for time reasons only. I will say to the tariff thing, that it's Peter Thiel organizing this, Donald Trump's been talking about tariffs since before I was born. So, and well before you were born. So this is not like a new idea that Peter Thiel was like, tariffs. It's like, this has been a Trump thing for a very long time, campaigned on it.
Wait, so then why didn't it happen in 2016?
Well, listen, he did put tariffs on China that actually President Biden had to keep, but he wanted to do it then.
Well, right now they're at 104%.
Well, what I'm saying is, let's let this play out. I'm going to bring you back. I happen to put my trust in President Trump when it comes to tariffs, and I put my trust in the American worker. And when you're talking about the billionaires benefiting, I think it's actually going to be, Main Street America and steel workers and ranchers and those folks who want their factories to come back and they want gainful employment and a living wage and working in these factory jobs. The left used to love the working class. I think that's what's going to happen. I also think we're going to end up with freer trade globally because I think President Trump is a great negotiator. But listen, we don't know, and we're going to wait and see. I really appreciate.
I'll tell you this.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, if you have your trust in President Trump, that's great. But if you have a trust fund right now, I recommend you keep that as far away from it as possible.
Listen, I'm not privileged enough to have a trust fund. I'm not a trust
fund.
fund.
I would love a trust. If I had a trust fund, I would probably be one of those consultants telling Joe Biden that he's okay.
Well, there you go. Please console your friend Harry for me. I know it's been a little rough on him lately, poor guy, but I appreciate you being so honest and forthright. And I hope we can have this conversation again. A lot more to discuss. So please do come back.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right, folks, I know the markets and the Democrats who hate Donald Trump more than they love America might have you panicked about tariffs, but you'd be smart to tune it out. I'll tell you why, because it's time for Final Thoughts. Alrighty, so there's been a lot of reaction in the markets and the media to Trump's tariffs, and yeah, to be expected, but I divided into two groups here. The first group are the Democrats who just hate Trump, and they salivate over any opportunity to crap on him and cheer for the downfall of America if it means they get an excuse to crap on him. The second group are the folks who live and die on the stock market, and I understand the panic and I understand the reaction because this stuff matters to Wall Street and it matters to folks who have retirement and 401ks dependent on the market. But to the second group of folks, I'd simply ask you to give President Trump the benefit of the doubt. I firmly believe he is doing all of this to get America and our interests back on solid ground. And he's willing to take some short-term flack for it because truth is, he is the only one in elected office today with the balls to do it.
They can't do this. We're going to have one shot at this, and no other president's going to do this, what I'm doing. And I'll tell you what, it's an honor to do it because we have been just destroyed what they've done to our system. We have $36 trillion of debt for a reason. And the reason is that people allowed it to get that way. So we'll be talking to China. We'll be talking to a lot of different countries. And I think, if we can make a really fair deal and a good deal for the United States, not a good deal for others. This is America first. It's now America first. And we didn't put America first. We put America last. The people that were in the Oval Office put America last, and we're not going to stand for it. Yeah.
For decades, the USA has been getting ripped off, and we got used to it. We got used to cheap crap from China and Vietnam, and we got used to selling out Main Street and blue-collar Americans so we could get cheap crap from the rest of the world. But I'd ask those of you over 40 a very serious question. What did we do before we bought all our crap from China? I'm 32, so I legit couldn't tell you, other than the stuff that was made pre-early 90s seemed to be a lot better quality, didn't smell like lead paint, didn't fall apart in a few years or days. And perhaps that's because it was made here by your neighbors, working for a living wage, doing an honest job and making things that are worth a damn. And you know what? Who knows? Trump's tariff strategy might actually leave us with freer trade, the art of the deal type stuff. But if these tariffs go into full effect and the worst case scenario is we pay a little more for stuff made here that doesn't smell like toxic paint and isn't assembled by a child in a sweatshop, I'd say that could be classified as a decent trade-off. All this to say, I have faith in President Trump, and I have faith in this process, and if we'd all just stick together and stick it out for a little bit, give it a chance to work, the payoff for all of us could be extraordinary, because the alternative is to do nothing at all. Go further into debt, kick the can down the road, and hope someday someone like Trump leads this country again and has enough balls to fix it. Or we can do it now. Doing nothing might save some political face, but it doesn't save America. And those are my final thoughts. I'll see you right back here live tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless and take care. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click here and make sure you subscribe here so you never miss a beat. I'll be here every weekday, and I hope you'll join me.